Hey, everybody, welcome. This is the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we bring you the stories of people who work to make the lives of others better locally, globally, and digitally. Rotary Club of Silicon Valley is one of 36,000 Rotary clubs around the world. There are 1.4 million Rotarians and Rotaractors who are working on all kinds of cool and interesting projects that we think can be inspiring in all sorts of ways. Our stories reach out to people who through their business or through their organizations or through their insight and implementation have made something interesting happen. And today we have some Rotary history with us. And I am very, very excited for us to welcome Sylvia Whitlock. Sylvia was the first woman ever to be a Rotary Club president. This was as part of the Rotary Club of Duarte here in California, and this was in 1987. She very kindly responded when I reached out to her about the possibility of speaking to us. And Sylvia, I'd like to hand the mic over to you and just tell you that it is an honor for us to have you here with us. Feel free to unmute and to give us your stories and wisdom. Thank you.
I'm glad you said unmute because I just looked down and sure enough, it was me. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today or tell you a little bit about the story that brought me into Rotary. It was a gift to me because it really made the difference in my life after I became a Rotarian. Number one, because I was so busy, and number two, because I was so busy doing what needed to be done. Okay. So I like to tell people that I consider that we in Rotary are on the edge of tomorrow. It's a tomorrow when we're going to see polio eradicated. Maybe we'll even see COVID eradicated one day. That'll be the next thing we'll take on. But polio is endemic only in two places now, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we know why those are problems. But it's also seen the acceptance of women in Rotary. It's almost 36 years since the Supreme Court said, women have to be Rotarians. In fact, it just passed 36 years, a day or two ago. So uh, here we are. How many of you were in Rotary when all this was going on? How many of you remember? Some people here, Shag remember. Oh, Andrew remembers. Chris, no? Oh, well, it's an interesting time. And so many times when I talk to people today, they have no clue that there was a time when Rotary didn't accept women. Can you believe? What a strange thing. Rotary didn't accept women. Well, I went to work in this little school district in Duarte. People say, how do you say Duarte? It's like DWA, Duarte, Duarte, but it sounds like Duarte. And I went to work in this little school district. And you know what principals do? You go and you talk to the superintendent because you want to know what the community is like, because you have their kids and you have to know what their kids need. So I went to talk to Richard Key, he was the superintendent, to ask him about the community. And he said, you don't have to worry about this community because we have a Rotary Club. Yeah, right. And Rotary is what? I had never heard of Rotary. What I knew about Rotary then could have been loosely written on the head of a pin. But you have to remember, this was way back in the late 60s, early 70s. And I didn't know anything about Rotary. I knew about Kiwanis. You guys know what Kiwanis means? What does it mean? It
Oh,
means waiting to get into Rotary. That's what a Kiwanian said. I know, yeah. That's what
that's
a
great.
Kiwanian told me. But I also knew about Lions because they supply the eyeglasses for kids in school today. Today in the store, I met a lady who said she was talking about eyeglasses. She was handing out papers about eyeglasses. I said, "Oh, they used to supply glasses to the kids in school. They still do." And I knew about lions. I knew about lions. I knew about elks. You know, elks who wear those interesting hats. Your wife a lion? That's great. Anyway, but I knew that in my school district, there was a problem with Rotary. I was told about it, and Dick said, you know, this is a little bedroom community in the San Gabriel Valley. The biggest business we had in that district, in that community, was the City of Hope Cancer Hospital, a well-known cancer hospital, and of course, the school district. And of course, the club was struggling to raise membership. And Dick thought, I have a journalist who's female, I have principals who are female, I have executives who are female. And at that time, Rotary was recruiting executive type people, leadership, people in leadership in their businesses. Uh, and so Dick said, why can't I invite these women? So he went to the district governor and asked if he could invite the women and explained himself. And the governor said, I agree with you, Dick, but I tell you what, you go ahead and invite them. When you invite them and you send their names into International, to Evanston, make sure you just use their initials so nobody will know it's women. See, now that didn't pass the four-way test, did it? It didn't pass the four-way test. But Dick thought, okay, I'll do that. And so he invited the women in and he enrolled them with their initials. And of course, everything went along swimmingly. And then the club got ready to celebrate its 25th anniversary. So you know what happens? All the bigwigs from Evanston come to attend the anniversary. They come to celebrate those milestones with their members. And so they came to Duarte, and everything was just going swimmingly. And then Dick introduced the women members. And the representative said, members, we don't have women in Rotary. And somebody said, this club does. Here they are. And they introduced them. Well, you could tell, you could cut the consternation with a knife. So those representatives went back to Evanston and they reported the Duarte Club for thinking they had women members. Well, you know how long it takes the mail to go across these days? It probably took it 10 minutes to come from Evanston back to Duarte. And they said 3 things they want us to remember. Women are not allowed in Rotary, number 1. Number 2, you need to ask the women to leave. Number 3, if they don't leave, you have to stop calling yourself a Rotary Club. Just like that. Well, the club took a vote and decided it would not ask women to leave. And Bill Brooks, who was one of our members at the time, said, that's okay. We don't have to call ourselves a Rotary Club. We'll just call ourselves Ex-Rotary Club of Duarte. And we put a big X over the Rotary pin. Gee, I used to have it here to show you. Put a big X over the little Rotary pin, and we renamed ourselves the Ex-Rotary Club of Duarte. Well, we were people laugh, and we think it's funny now. We were the Ex-Rotary Club of Duarte for 11 years. 11 years. Well, we decided we would appeal to the Council on Legislation. And the council was meeting that year in Tokyo because we tried to appeal to the board for them to get women. And we were told the board wouldn't listen to people who were not members. But the Council on Legislation would. So we appealed to the Council on Legislation, which was meeting that year in Tokyo. Well, it was an interesting situation, however, because when the issue came up for consideration, it wasn't whether women should be members of Rotary. The issue that came up was, did the Rotary Club of Duarte violate Rotary's bylaws by inviting women? Well, hey, everybody knew we had. The answer was clear, and I was cast a vote that resulted in women not being allowed at that time was 1,000 to 34. Well, there were 34 delegates at the COL who believed that women should be in Rotary. And guess what? I met one of them on a train in Calgary when the Rotary convention was in Calgary. I was riding in a train on my way to the convention center, and I was sitting across from a man and his wife, And they were all tagged. And you know how we used to wear tags on the street, but we don't do it anymore. They were all tagged, as was I. And so we were reading each other's tags. And the gentleman said, Rotary Club of Duarte, isn't that the club that invited women? I said, yeah, and here we are. I was really excited about it, maybe a little too excited. And he said, I voted to have women. And he said, I was at the COL interview, and I voted to have women in Rotary because I always thought they should be there. And his wife, who had been sitting really quietly next to him, said, well, I didn't think so then, and I don't think so now. And I thought, did I say something? Did I do something? Did my tag on wrong? I couldn't imagine what had happened. Well, there were a lot of women at that time who didn't want their husbands going to Rotary. She said, we don't want our husbands going to Rotary meetings at night and meeting with women and who knows what. I said, okay, so it's the men's problem there. They're not trustworthy. So we can't invite women there because they might entice them. I know. Well, there's a little bit of information, little known bit of information. In the 1950s, Detroit had put an item on the COL to change the bylaws about women. And of course, it was defeated. You know how that process goes. It was defeated and the club didn't press it. But even more interesting, the first Rotary Constitution did not specify that Rotarians had to be men, just persons, it said, of good character. But that was a time when there were few women in the workaday. And because men were the ones engaging in fellowship and business activities, the bylaws just evolved into men of good character. If I could ask Paul Harris a question today, it would be, would you have intentionally excluded women from Rotary? I went to the Paul Harris exhibit. If you've been to Evanston and you go into the headquarters, there's a Paul Harris room in there with a life-size image of Paul Harris. And I walked in there and I took his hand and I said, would you have intentionally excluded women from Rotary? And he didn't say a word. Not a word. Jack Davis, who was the president of Rotary when all this was going on, said the unity of Rotary International was jeopardized by the unilateral move of the Duarte Club. So what did they do? They sent a delegation to Duarte and they asked us to surrender our charter. They said, you may not be a Rotary Club with women, and you don't want to ask women to leave, so you're not no longer chartered. We had to give up our charter. Came right to our coffee shop and took it. So of course we don't have a charter now, but we have an X over the Rotary icon, and we're now the Ex-Rotary Club of Duarte. And we just kept on doing what Rotarians did, except we didn't have international service because we didn't have the vehicle for that. But we took care of the community, we took care of the schools, we took care of the people who needed help in the community. We did everything that Rotarians usually do. And from a neighboring club, a Rotarian whose name was Sanford Smith said, you know what, I bet you we can take this case to court, like the woman admitted. And I mean, we're going happily along because we're doing what we want to do anyway. So we gave notice to Rotary that we were going to take it to California, courts in California. And Rotary petitioned that it be heard in federal court. The reason for that was that they said not all members of the board of directors are Californians. But you see, what had really happened was there had been a precedent in federal court where a New York club had been seeking exclusionary rights for private club membership. Federal court, taking note of that, that was a possible, positive reaction, said the case needs to be heard in a California court. Federal court said no, they wouldn't hear it. It had to be heard in a California court. And of course, it was first heard by the California Superior Court. You keep track of all these courts because there were a lot of them. The California Superior Court. And right away, they upheld Rotary's right to expel the club. But we all sat up and took notice because we thought this was going to be a pushover. That who would say no You know, Rotary's mantra, service above self. We thought extra women to do service. Who would say we don't want women? Well, the court said Rotary has a right to. And so we knew right away we would have to sit up and take notice. And what we did was make plans to appeal to the appellate court. And our attorney, doing some work for the first time. We weren't paying him, so we didn't. Our attorney said, uh, there's a law in New York, in California, just as there is in a lot of other states, that prohibits discrimination in public accommodation. And Rotary was considered a public accommodation because of its classification system. And also, at that time, 80% of the Rotarians had their dues paid by their employers. It wasn't a public accommodation. Well, he went to court with it's Jesse Unruh Act. He went back to the appellate court using the Unruh Act as his reference and appealed the Superior Court decision. And immediately, the appellate court overturned the Superior Court. And so we won that round. Well, that was a California court, right? A California appellate court. So now that decision is incumbent on all California Rotary clubs, but only California. So we moved on. But of course, before women changed, things changed really slowly in Rotary. And so I was coming into uh, Rotary as president, and I was invited to PETS. And I was sent a postcard that said, please make sure you bring your coat and tie because directory pictures will be taken. Okay, I'll get my coat and tie. So at that meeting, in my coat and tie, I was the only woman with 290 men. No other woman in this meeting, in this PETS, that's President-elect training seminar. But the nicest thing about that proportion was that during restroom breaks, when we walked in the hall, what do you think? And I had that restroom all to myself, and there was long lines of men waiting outside the men's restroom. And I could just sashay past and go into the women's restroom. Yeah, hey, that was 40 years ago. I could sashay. Right. There wasn't even one female speaker, but most of the men, probably all of the men, were cordial and friendly. They wanted to know what we were doing and how we were working on this. And at the section on Rotary International, I heard our incoming governor discuss the case, and he said, Rotary International will appeal to the United States Supreme Court. You guys know SCOTUS? He said Rotary will appeal to the United States Supreme Court, and we have every reason to believe we will win. And he added, of course, in direct reference to the size of our club, the small size of our club. It's just a case of the mouse that roared. So I sat there taking furious notes. I went back to Duarte, and we had a new banner for the Ex-Rotary Club of Duarte, and on the bottom it said, the mouse that roared. So, we even had a mouse pin. I wish I had thought to bring all those things. Maybe I will. And I never thought that 1987, somebody would be appealing a case about women's membership in a service club to the Supreme Court of the United States. I was a teacher. I was a school principal. I was used to hearing the Supreme Court deal with Roe versus Wade, which was gone the way of all flesh, right? Roe versus Wade, that was the Supreme Court decision. Or Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, that was a school discrimination. Okay. But membership in a service club, why would they want to hear it? See, I wasn't very smart. I wasn't thinking about the civil rights aspect of that case. And that's what grabbed the Supreme Court, the civil rights aspect. Well, I did appeal because as one of their attorneys so commonly put it, they're forcing us to take everybody in. It's like a motel. That's how they talk. Well, RI's argument was that the ruling violated their First Amendment right of association. But the Supreme Court did take it. And on May the 4th, 1987, May this month, the court found that considering the size, purpose, selectivity, and exclusivity of Rotary's membership, the relationship among the club's members was not of the intimate or private variety which warrants First Amendment protection. That was it. Sandra Day O'Connor didn't vote because her husband was a Rotarian. She had to go home that day. But the unanimous court did vote. And Justice Powell, who wrote the decision, he argued many of Rotary's activities, including their meetings, are conducted in the presence of strangers. And because women members would not prevent the club from carrying out its purposes, there was no violation of associational rights. Furthermore, he said, and this was the heavy paragraph, furthermore, even if there were a slight encroachment on the rights of Rotarians to associate, that minimal infringement would be justified since it serves the state's compelling interest in ending sexual discrimination, gender discrimination. And there it was. And the decision was now incumbent on all USA clubs. And I was driving to work that morning. The decision was announced on the East Coast in New York. And so 3 hours later, I'm driving to school when the news came on. And I got so excited because it had only taken maybe 4 months for for it to go through the court. And by the time I arrived at school, some 20 minutes later, I think all the media in the world were on my doorstep. You know, Mary Lou, who was the first woman invited with me and another one, Mary Lou and I were still in the district. We were invited to be interviewed by Warren Olney, who was a CBS newscaster, and he was going to interview for the networks. And Dr. Key said, you guys need to leave your school and come to the district office because we need to have school. And we can't have school with all the cameras rolling around and kids getting excited. So we went to the district office and we sat in the boardroom and with Warren Olney, and he asked a lot of questions. And he directed them at me because I was the incoming president. They knew that. And he asked, many questions to which I gave studied and intelligent answers, I thought. Well, near the end of the interview, in fact, we were already on our feet. He asked how I got selected to be president. What do you guys say when they ask you that? Oh, I don't know. I must have missed the meeting. This smart lady, right? Sitting up there saying, oh, I don't know. I must have missed a meeting. Well, that was a careless and decidedly unstudied moment. And that evening, the story was on the top of the news. Some of you may remember it was the first item on the news on all the networks everywhere. And what do you think they played? He had maybe 4 hours of copy. What do you think they played? Oh, I don't know. I must have missed it. And here's the world out there looking and saying, we waited 11 years to get this. This is what we're going to get when we get women. Well, I started to learn then of the I knew I was going to have to adopt a more serious note. And of course, back at the club, we had to move our meeting place because we couldn't accommodate the visitors who really wanted to come and see what was going on. And this was my first year as incoming president, and we had a lot of things to work on. Like Polio Plus, that was the beginning of Polio Plus, and all this happened. So the whole world was watching us. We had some interesting telephone calls, including one that asked if the food were any better now that there were women involved. So no, we're eating the same rubber chicken everybody else eats. We're not cooking. So, some were decidedly less pleasant. We didn't get a welcome back from Rotary, but we did get a new due schedule, so we knew that they knew. And in 1989, following an impassioned speech by Frank Devlin, some of you may remember Frank Devlin, at the COL, the Council on Legislation vote, kept women members into Rotary. And that was it. There was a whole lot of other stuff, but I think you need the time now. So if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Wonderful, Sylvia. Thank you so much for your story and for your willingness to serve at such a difficult time in Rotary. I mean, it was no small act of courage to be willing to stand as president. I want to introduce the group that we've got. And so joining us from the Rotary Club of Eugene Metropolitan is my colleague and in Finding Speakers, Heather Edwards. Heather, always good to have you.
And you know,
From
Heather, Mary Lou Elliott lived in Eugene. She was one of the first women. She lived in Eugene, Oregon. She left because she couldn't take the rain.
I understand.
Excellent. And joining us from Singapore, although normally in Florida or Ontario, is Chris Cochran of the District 7040 Rotary Passport Club, a member of the Placentia Rotary, Andrea Mosqueda, who is up in the Bay Area and will soon be looking to move membership up here. And Andrea, it's such a pleasure to have you with us as well. From the Rotary Club, the Rotary E-Club of Innovation in England, Andrew Jameson. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. And then from our own club, our own paella master, Shags Shagrin, and probably our most tenured member of the group today, who moved from the Rotary E-Club of the Southwest USA to the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley about 8 years ago. So with that, I'd like to open up the questions. The first, you spoke to a little bit kind of towards the end, but Chris asked about blowback that you received. You know, when people understood that the Duarte Club had achieved this victory, and that you were going to be able to go forward. How did that go for you personally? I assume that there was a lot of both responses, shall I say?
It's funny that you asked that because my son was probably about 16, 17 at the time that this happened. And of course, the newspaper was all coming, and they came to my house to interview us. And he stepped out in barefooted. And I said, BG, you need to put some shoes on. And I said to the photographer, you're not taking a picture of his feet, are you? And he said, no. And the next day on the front of the Claremont Courier was BG barefooted. With that story. So we learned a lot of things that way. But how did it go for me? It was fine. We just kept on doing what we had been doing before. And it was an almost imperceptible change. There was no line of demarcation of before Rotary and after Rotary, except that we could get into international projects once we became Rotary again.
Excellent.
And you know, and we had to wear real.
Well, very, very cool. Your hand is up, Andrew. So if you want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation, and thank you very much for leading the way, so to speak. You know, I wouldn't have transferred my membership of Rotaract in Woking many years ago to my current Rotary Club of Woking District until, you know, they actually had the vote to allow women into each individual club, because that, I think, I can't quite remember, but I think that's what had to happen in each club. And yes, you know, it has made a difference in locally. You know, we've had several women presidents, you know, and we got rid of the single gender aspect. And I think it's vitally important to have, you know, both sexes in a club. You know, we all have our own strengths, and we can all bring things to the party. So all I'll just say is thank you. I don't think there's any particular question, but you can comment on it if you want.
You know, it's really interesting what you say, because it's so right. There was a time when men were doing all the work in the world. They were the ones in business. They were the ones who were prominent in business, and the women were at home with the kids. But that changed over the years, except Rotary didn't change with it. Rotary was very slow to change that part. So that's what you know, we were advocating for women because they were out there in the world and we wanted to join. I mean, I knew about United Way, and you know that money would come out of my paycheck and go into United Way. But as far as community service was concerned, that was what we were doing. We wanted to be out there with our hands in it, just the way women and men today work together. So that's what we wanted. That's what we got.
And what we still want.
It's a long time. Do you believe it took 11 years for us to do that? went through 3 courts, 11 years.
Speaking of the courts, Andrea asks, after the Supreme Court decision, did you see a rise in membership from folks who identify as people of color or other minority groups?
Well, you know, one of the first questions I got after the decision was, now that you have women in Rotary, you're going to get blacks in Rotary? Yeah, that was the question. And I said, actually, we killed those 2 birds with 1 stone. We got a black woman. So, but with DEI and with all the things, it's not just women. We've had LGBT people who have said, "Is it okay for us to be in Rotary? And how does Rotary feel about us?" And all kinds of people who have different identification. And it's DEI says it's open to everyone who wants to, and that's what we're doing.
Wonderful, Sylvia. The one question that I think of when I think of my experience in a previous Rotary Club was that there was an issue of having a member who was acting in such a way as to make it uncomfortable for women in that club. And one of the difficult pieces of that was that the club and the district mostly just didn't want to deal with it. Right? They just kind of hoped the problem would go away.
Yeah.
How do we better equip our members to be active in making Rotary a space that is comfortable for everybody?
And you're right, a space that is comfortable for everyone, everyone. And Rotary has taken that on with the DEI. That is the whole idea. That is the whole idea.
So today, a final question for today. You've inspired us. Can you tell us about some of the Rotarians who have inspired you?
Oh, lot of special Rotarians have inspired me. A lot of past presidents, of course. At the top is Jennifer Jones. And by the way, when Jennifer was here last year for the Rose Parade, I took her to Duarte and showed her the building and showed her the room. I think some of you may have seen it on Facebook. I think she put a little blog on, a little posting on Facebook. But I took her to show her where it all started, where it all happened. But Jennifer has been there. Marta Yagbe have said lots of interesting things. There are a lot of people in Rotary who have inspired me, the people I've met just day to day. I have a great deal of respect for, and I'm looking towards like McNally, who's coming in, who's going to be a really good president from Scotland, and another whole string of women who are coming in after Jennifer. And I learn something everywhere I go. And I'm looking forward to going to Singapore again. And I've been to Singapore several times because I had, through Rotary, an exchange student who came from Singapore, and I went there and visited with her and learned not to drop paper on the sidewalk or drop anything on the sidewalk that you can get a ticket for, and so on. So a lot of people. But Jennifer stands out for me because I look at her this year and I think there must be 10 Jennifers. I don't know how she can be in all the places where she is this year. And she's doing a good job in making sure she touches base with all the Rotary clubs.
Wonderful. Well, I'll wind things down for the recording, and Sylvia, we will pass it back to you for the final word in just a moment. But all of you who have watched this recording, thank you for taking your time to spend with us, with the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. It is our goal to record programs that inspire us to see our own potential to be difference makers in our communities and in the lives of others. We ask that you do a couple of things if you are on our page, on our SiliconValleyRotary.com page. And that is to scroll down a little to let us know you were here through the attendance form. By doing so, you'll receive an email that will be something you can pass along to your club secretary to make up a miss if that If like Shags, you're working on 40 plus years of perfect attendance. And then a little farther down is our forum. And tell us what you thought of the program as well as the other elements of the meeting. It's one of the ways in an online and asynchronous club we have the chance to share ideas. If you are on our YouTube, feel free to like this particular program and to subscribe to our channel. We believe that the stories we share are the kinds of things that will make your life better as well. As we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for the final word. Sylvia, thank you again for the time you spent with us, and I invite you to add the last thought for the recording.
Two things. I would like to put in your heads, in your memory, in your action, a school I support in India. It's the Payali Learning Center. It's in Payali, India. It's just outside of Kolkata. If you ever want to support a good place, we started this school probably 12 years ago in a little village where girls never knew anything about school. Now there are about 220 girls. The year that I was district governor, we raised $90,000 and built a 4-story school in that little community. And last year, we graduated 3 girls who went to nursing school and came out professional midwives. And you believe it, from a little village where they didn't even know there was school. And there's a 4th one who's here up in San Luis Obispo who's going to medical school here. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing that I want you to remember is to invite people to join Rotary. Wear your pin all the time. I wear my pin all the time. Wear your pin when you go home. I fly a lot. And if you ever want to attract somebody's attention with your pin, just drop it on the floor. Ever try to pick up anything off the floor in front of you on an airplane? Impossible. And while you're struggling to pick it up, that person who's sitting next to you, if they would make a good Rotarian, they might say, "Can I help? What are you trying to get?" And you say, "My Rotary pin." And they say, "Rotary? What's Rotary?" And you know those little blue cards that you hand out, what is Rotary? Keep those all the time, a little elevator speech, and give it to him. Refer him to a Rotary club, and get your pin. So, and when you go home at night, take off the pin and put it on your pajamas. I mean, your pajamas. Put on your pajamas. The person who is sleeping next to you is saying, "Why are you wearing that on your pajamas?" And you tell them how important Rotary is. So you know what? Next morning at work, wherever, near the coffee pot or the water cools, they'll say, "You know what my wife did last night?" Or "You know what my husband did last night?" They put the Rotary pin on their pajamas. And that person will say, "Rotary? What's Rotary?" There's another opening. You have another person to invite to Rotary. And that's how you keep telling about Rotary. And remember, invite young people to Rotary. You want them to grow up in Rotary. They can be Rotaractors. They start them as interactors. You can start them as interactors. But invite them to Rotary so they know about it. So it won't be a news item. Invite them to Rotary, the best humanitarian organization. And thank you for asking me.
It is our pleasure. We thank you, and we thank all of you for watching. We'll see you next week.